1970, 2,200 Minneapolis teachers illegally went on strike and stayed out of their schools for nearly 3 weeks. What would bring a group of law-abiding teachers to this point? What issues would demand this dramatic action? Why would teachers risk loss of pay increases, pension benefits, and even their jobs for uncertain gains?
There's a general poor morale among teachers in the building. We had gone through long years of being deprived of salaries, of poor working conditions, of having nothing really to say about how the school should be run.
So all that frustration built up over issues concerning elementary teachers, their right to preparation time, discipline issues, class size maximums, pay schedules, all the rest of it, mounting frustration, which then, of course, spilled over in 1970 when we could reach no agreement.
The reasons for the strike dated back quite a number of years. It happened that John Davis had come on as superintendent in the middle of 1967 and had a great respect for the teachers and sympathy toward many of their positions, and it certainly, I think, began and it came to a head from history of many years prior to his arrival.
Strike. I came here from a school district that was in many ways much better prepared for meeting educational need. And I had come prior to that from a school district that had facility and equipment and material and salary schedule that was as good as any private school of the best order in all of New England. And so I could see the disadvantages that were inherent here in the Minneapolis school district.
I think probably the key issue was simply our determination that we had the right to negotiate a contract.
That was the dilemma. The teachers that went out on strike to fight for benefits, fight for union recognition and so on, had to be punished. Now, how were they punished? They took a year of seniority away from them, they took a year of pension benefits away from them, and they were the ones that were the losers, even though they were the ones that stuck out their neck and had the intestinal fortitude to go out there and challenge the board in terms of trying to do something about their conditions.
In an elementary school, when you were unable to really visit because you're with children all day, it was hard to get any spirit behind it and to organize ourselves. So when I started working in the union, I saw as one of my goals getting prep time for elementary teachers and also to do something about that maternity leave problem, try to get rid of some of the inequities. And at that time,
I believe that a fundamental issue here was that question of where the dominance would be in terms of a teacher organization. But I don't minimize for a moment the significance of some of the issues that the strike was caused by, and that had to do with the quality of teaching, the opportunity to meet children's needs. I remember going to Phillips Junior High School shortly after I arrived in January of 1967 as the superintendent, and having a teacher look at me and saying, if you have a little spare chalk out at 807, would you send it down, because we haven't had chalk in this school for a year.
Also, the question of why the teachers were striking. I had 2 kindergarten teachers, young, good-looking young women who came to me in my office, not even knowing I was on the school board, and said they were striking because they were always running short of drawing paper in their classes. And that was their reason. And they were all in favor of a strike because they thought they should have better supplies.
and in the elementary schools we were a smaller group of people, so and we were with our children all the time, so there wasn't really an opportunity to build up camaraderie. And when things started building toward a strike, there was a lot of divisiveness, and it really hurt in a lot of the schools. It was very painful, and you felt a lot of time like you were alone, and you had the same complaints, but how far would you go to to support them, and would you be willing to break a law? That would
Just have so much gratitude to the teachers for going along with knowing what they were getting into, to go out on that sidewalk and do what they did. It's just a tremendous feat on their part.
In Minnesota, a no-strike law had been passed as a reprisal for earlier strikes. In 1948, Minneapolis Federation teachers had taken to the streets after several years of actual pay cuts. In spite of bitter cold, they had stayed out for 3 weeks. Again, in 1951, the two Minneapolis teachers' unions had felt compelled to give full support of a janitor's strike by going on the lines with them. As a result, the Minnesota legislature passed the harsh, punitive no-strike law, which made it unlawful for teachers and any other public employees to go on strike. The law stated that they would, by striking, be automatically dismissed, lose tenure and pension benefits, be placed on probation, and forfeit any salary increases if rehired.
The law, as I remember it, in effect said that if teachers went on strike, they were automatically terminated with a job, from their jobs, and that if they were rehired, they would be without tenure and were not entitled to any increases in pay for a full year.
A meet and confer law passed in 1967 was woefully inadequate. It made no provision for real collective bargaining. It was not mutually binding, and it made no provision for mediation or arbitration if meeting and conferring failed.
The law that Minnesota had at that time, as you know, was totally inadequate. There was no provision for any employees, any public employees, to actually negotiate. It was just not there. In fact, there was no language at all. That there was a no-strike law, a law which said that teachers, no public employees could strike for any kind of improvements. But the fact is, there wasn't a defined way until the association-sponsored bill, which was called Meet and Confer, did pass. But that did not provide any kind of negotiations. It did not say that the Board of Education had to meet with us. It didn't say that they had to accommodate any of our demands. There was no provisions for negotiations in a give-and-take manner. And that was the primary frustration, as far as I was concerned, that needed attention. And one of probably, we looked at it from that standpoint, is about the only way that that was going to be changed was some form of dramatic militant action.
Across the nation, teachers had become increasingly militant in their demands for more voice in the policy-making functions of schools and in those issues which directly affected the quality of their work life, those areas which school boards had long deemed non-negotiable. In Minneapolis, negotiating, or more correctly, meeting and conferring, was done between the school board and a teachers' council. Membership on the council was determined by proportionate membership, so the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, Local 59, held 3 seats, and the City of Minneapolis Education Association held 2 seats.
But certainly one of the great issues that the Board of Education had to deal with was Chapter 633 of the laws of '67, which denied the right of strike. And the consequences of denying that or of violating that were significant. And the Board of Education, and I think I can say all of the administrators, certainly I felt very strongly for the teachers in that situation, because the penalty of Chapter 633 was probation for 2 years, no increase in salary, and a loss of tenure. This was a law, and the teachers knew that this was the law. Consequently, the board was bound by that law, and it was also bound by the process which was initiated under the meet and confer law. We could negotiate or discuss only with a designated group. And so one of the problems that the Board of Education and the superintendent had, and again I have to make clear that I'm speaking only as I recall it, was that for a long period of time the American Federation of Teachers, Local 59, refused to meet with the adjustment panel and with the teacher council. The teacher council, you may recall, was finally evolved, or the resolution finally came. The teacher council would be made up of 3 representatives from the AFFT and 2 from the CMEA. There were some lively times, and at one point in the attempt to meet, the CMEA representatives were denied entry. The police were called, and that was in one of the meetings we had at a hotel. So it was hard for the superintendent to know how to meet, because the organization, which was designed by law, was not operative.
Sure, the teacher council was made up of 5 members. And there was 3 members from the Federation of Teachers who had more members than the CME did, and the other 2 members, Jim Bennett and myself, were from the CME. And my role on the teacher council was to serve as the chief spokesperson for the association.
Okay. I was one of the 3 appointed members of the Teachers Council from the Federation. And we started working toward some of those goals in the Teachers Council, but it seemed hopeless. We just didn't have any power. And as we worked toward getting a collective bargaining bill and started working for that law, we realized that there was probably not much chance that it was going to happen without taking some drastic action.
The meet and confer law was an attempt by the legislature to rectify some of that. And what it did, it forced the CMEA and Local 59, who were political enemies for membership and whatever, to have to work together. And it was done on a basis of, if you had more members in the Local 59 than they did in the CMEA, you were given what's the word I'm looking for, a proportionate member of that committee. Well, we didn't want to participate with that. The fact is, we never did. And that was one of the things that led to the strike, was an attempt by Local 59 to cast out that law that didn't work and try to find some other better method to do it.
But I would go from one room to the other. CMEA in this room, AFFT in that room. And it was awkward, to say the least. I didn't enjoy it, and I looked to the day when there would be one representative group. But it was not for me to precipitate that issue. It wasn't for me to represent an opinion with reference to what it should be, because I had colleagues and great teachers on both sides of the issue. But it was, to some extent, quite awkward to have to deal with 2 groups and then hope to get synthesis.
At first, the MFT refused to take part in the Teachers' Council because the board could still make any decision it wanted. The MFT then reversed that decision and took control of the council through its majority of votes. Before 1970, strike votes had been taken several times. Those who lost on the 1969 strike vote formed what came to be known as the 1025 Club, and those MFT members worked hard to make certain that if a vote were taken again, it would pass.
And then in 1969, when we had an impasse under the meet and confer law, the union again took a strike vote, and this time lost. I think the vote was 1450 to 1025, and those who voted for the strike and the strike lost, they became members of what was known as the 1025 Club.
I still would go back to the 1025 vote, I guess, the 69. It was in 68 that the Minneapolis local did establish a concerted program for collective bargaining, and along with that, a membership growth program. We knew that if we were ever to get to that stage, and that also, as you know, is part of the collective bargaining process, is the establishing of an exclusive bargaining agent for an employee group. And that was another thing we had to some way establish also, rather than just being a majority on a teacher's council. The union labor philosophy is that you live by the majority. You have a secret ballot election by which the teachers, the employee group, votes and establishes the valid representative, the agent that's going to do that. So we felt that one of the first steps to getting to the bargaining process is to build our membership. And
we took strike votes about 4 or 5 years in a row, and we always felt that if we couldn't get 80% of the vote to go in favor of a strike, it could not be a successful strike.
In 1970, the Teachers Council had included in its proposal, besides a proposed salary increase, a number of crucial items which had previously been considered non-negotiable items. These included provision for preparation time for elementary teachers, the establishment of maximum class size in elementary schools, and a discipline policy which would allow a teacher to have more of a voice in removing disruptive students from the classroom. Additional issues centered around teacher assignments and transfers, pupil load, and a written contract. The board also wanted to include these additional items. Teachers would be assigned to 5 community activities, and teachers would be frozen on the salary schedule unless they received a positive evaluation and also regularly returned to college.
Another area of board concern was the reality that much that the teachers were requesting had basis in fact. There was the issue of release time, there was the issue of preparation time, there was the issue of class size, there was the issue of salary and compensation. And there was also the transcending issue, in a sense, from the point of view, well, I could say the board, but certainly the superintendent, when we were out of money, literally. And the prospect of going to community for 9, 10, or 12, or 15 mills was a difficult thing to contemplate at that time in history when money was seen to be scarce all around.
Because all the time, you've got to understand that the board is subject to the pressure of citizens groups, taxpayers associations, downtown council, all urging us to keep taxes down.
I don't think they wanted to surrender authority that they believed they had, inherent managerial authority. He was well-intentioned. I think he adopted a hands-off policy, and I think that may have been a mistake. He relied on his subordinates. We were hoping he would have taken a more active interest in the process. Of course, and he then at the last minute he made it a last-minute effort to try to resolve things. The day before the strike, he called me, and requested a meeting downtown. I think it was at the Minneapolis Club. He wanted a few of us down to meet with him and a few other administrators to see whether or not the strike could be averted. But basically, by then it had gone too far, and they were not willing to negotiate on these key issues, so it was too late. I think
By the time negotiations broke down in 1970, teachers' feelings on the issues that divided them from the board ran deep. When there seemed to be no answer to the impasse, the MFT leadership came before the membership for a strike vote.
Well, in the spring of '70, they were pretty decisive. As a matter of fact, we had 2,200 teachers out on strike. Of the then 3,400, 1,700 plus of those 2,200 were members of Local 59. But I could see by going to many membership meetings after school. I was teaching, of course, English full-time, but Dale Holstrom and I and other officers, we went to a number of meetings around, and I could sense that this was different from 1969. I could sense a pretty solid movement that either there was going to be a reasonable contract reached in negotiations, or there would be a strike.
Okay, well, the strike had been brewing for a long time, and I think it was Bob Rose called me and said, would you like to work on a strike committee? And I had been fairly active in the union up to that point. And so we went to the union headquarters on a Saturday morning, and with no idea whatsoever how to organize a strike. You know, if you've never done it, how do you do it? Where do you begin? And we sat and we just kind of brainstormed for a while, and somebody said, well, obviously, you know, we got to keep track of our areas. So we just took a map of the school district and try to divide the schools off into little sections. And then each of the strike committee people took one section. And I think mine was section 2, which was the near north side, and that had my school in it. We divided into, I think, 5 sections, and then we were to name or get a volunteer from each school to be the strike coordinator for that school. And no idea how that would work, and then we all went home and started calling our people and asking them. Surprisingly, I think about 80–90% of the people that I called said yes, or no, I won't do it alone, it's too darn much work, but my buddy and I will work on it together. So we had co-captains at a lot of schools, a lot of larger schools, and within about, I think that was on a Saturday, by Monday most of those people had in a list of all the people they thought would be on strike.
In an emotional 2-hour meeting on Monday, April 6th, the vote was taken. A large banner reading, "Our strength is in our union," was across the podium. While the votes were counted, strike chairman Bob Rose and his committee coached teachers on techniques and rules for picketing. When the vote was counted, it was 1,170 to 312 in favor of striking.
People on the floor that night who spoke against the vote. Some of them were retiring, people who were going to retire within the next 2 or 3 years. That was a big issue for some people.
Strike was to begin at 7 a.m. on Thursday, April 9th. On Tuesday, principals were briefed on keeping buildings open. They were not to dismiss classes without approval. They were to take roll of teachers. School janitors, matrons, bus attendants, and other members of Service Employees Local 63 were instructed by their business agent not to do any work which could be construed as teachers' work and which would hamper the strike in any way.
Apparently the Federation had met with the school board on Tuesday morning of the week of the strike, had a breakfast meeting, and trying to talk about the differences, and no agreement was reached. But Wednesday afternoon at the Cap Towers, now the Holiday Inn Central, faculty teachers councils called together to consider a tentative proposal on the contract. Jim Bennett and I walked into the suite up on the 14th floor at Cap Towers, and present at the time was Norma Moen, president of the Federation, Dale Holstrom, the executive secretary of the Federation, who was negotiating the contract for the Federation, and the 2 male members from the Federation. Colleen Shepman was not there at the time. Jim Bennett and I walked in, and we were told that we have a tentative settlement. We found out the details, and they proceeded to take a vote of the Teachers' Council to see if they would accept this contract or not. The 2 Federation males accepted the contract. Jim Bennett and I voted to abstain because we felt it was not our strike, and we were not going to make that decision for the Federation. After the decision was made, Dale Holstrom was on the phone dialing John B. Davis, superintendent. At that time, Colleen Wolf walked into the room. He hung up the phone and said, "Colleen, we have a settlement." She heard what the settlement was and found out that it did not include elementary prep time, and she said, "No, I'm not going to accept that contract. That is not a settlement. I will not accept that. I demand we re-vote on this contract." So we did. Then it passed 3 yes, 2 abstentions. Jim and I again both abstained. That's when Dale Holstrom then called John B. Davis back and said, "We'll not accept the final offer. The strike is on." As a result of the strike, they did get the elementary prep time, and they got further clarification of class size, max, and restrictions. And they got the teachers back with some penalty.
I have to admit, I felt very heavy responsibility for the fact, here's what we were asking. You know, at least, we needed at least 1,500 to 2,000 teachers to do this. And yeah, it was a very sleepless night. It was not a very good night to sleep. Of course, there wasn't very many hours to sleep anyway. I don't know whether you knew where we spent the night in a motel in South Minneapolis. 4 or 5 of us that were on the committee because we didn't dare go home. There were not warrants, but they were looking to serve papers on, most of us were on the executive board or in a bargaining capacity, cease and desist order or something. Anyway, that was determined that we should not go home, we should go to various motels and wait the night out, which we did.
One telephone call made the strike operable at 7 a.m. on Thursday, April 9th. 2,190 teachers were absent from class on Thursday, April 9th. 1,040 were present.
I knew there'd be somebody there, but what if they go to the school and there's a couple of the militants there and that's it? You know, what are we going to do? But we came over the hill and we were in South Minneapolis, so the first school we stopped at was probably in the one that we were most concerned about. You know, it was in what would be viewed as a district that, why would these teachers strike? And we came over that hill and we had solid lines. We had, we knew we had the majority of the teachers on that picket line. And what a relief. What, that's first, I guess, they're there. And so, all right, now we can do something. And as we went on to the other schools, we made a circle around to the other schools before we went back to the headquarters, and it was the same everywhere. And in fact, as we got closer into the city, it got even better as far as numbers. And it was so well organized, and it was so calm and, the way it should be. There were teachers going in, but there were also teachers who weren't going in, but they weren't on the picket line. But our people were, in a very professional way, talking to them, not harassing them, not haranguing them. But they wanted to hear first. They listen to the story first. Now, if you want to win, we're not going to stop you. But here's why we're here. And an awful lot of our just rank and file members accomplished an awful lot that first morning or two on the strike.
I started the phone chain for my little area, called all my strike captains, and said, okay, tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, hit the sidewalk. I'll have the signs to everyone by that time. I got up at 6 o'clock, went to North High to deliver the signs, and nobody there except John Bastelis, my old buddy, and nobody else around. And he had a little sign he had made himself with a ballpoint pen. It wasn't very well done. And I gave him a big sign, and he and I walked up and down the sidewalk together. And I got, that terrible sinking feeling you get when you have a party and 8 o'clock comes and there's nobody there yet. I looked around and thought, boy, maybe I'm the only guy on strike in the whole system. And John just kept right on marching, and I had to go over to strike headquarters at the Polish National Alliance. And as I drove away and saw John still bravely marching along, I saw about 4 or 5 other people join him, and then as I came around the other corner, I saw about 5 or 6 more. And I knew that we were underway. And then we went back to the P&A hall. I had told my strike captains, as soon as you got all your people online, call in and let me know how many you got. And then the numbers started coming in, and Paul Horvick and I, who was the other strike captain in Area 2, started adding them up, and we knew we had close to 2/3 of the teachers.
And let me tell you, that Wednesday morning, when you put that placard on your shoulder and walked down that sidewalk, you had quit your job. You had given up seniority. You had given up your salary. You had given up your pension, probably, if you weren't hired back.
Secondary schools, where MFT membership was very strong, were hit the hardest. At Edison High School, only 18 students and 5 teachers showed up. At Bryant Junior High, only 4 out of 57 teachers were present, with 507 students present. By 10:45, the Northside headquarters listed 27 schools, mostly junior and senior high schools, which the MFT considered closed.
Well, one of the things we did was organize the strike headquarters. North side was the Polish National Alliance. South side, I believe, was a Legion club, which we got kicked out of. Apparently, they decided that they were afraid of bad publicity or something. And that's kind of another story. But the P&A hall, when I got there in the morning, it wasn't even open. An old gentleman opened the door for me, and I went up there, and once again I had that sinking feeling that I'm the only guy at the party. And Paul Horvick and I went up there, and we had 4 phones that had been installed just the day before for us, and the phone calls started coming in, as I said before, and we knew how many people we had online. And then Bob Rose had arranged for coffee and donuts the first morning, and as the time went on, the food got better and better, and teachers started bringing in food on their own. It became just a wonderful social setting, and morale, instead of going down, got higher and better.
We were all filled with tremendous enthusiasm when we came to the meetings. I think they were almost every day at one of the downtown hotels. The spirit of the membership was tremendous. That gave us great confidence. That certainly was very memorable. And of course, we were determined every day to try to make progress, and there were times there when very little progress was made. And that was frustrating. But I think what stands out to me is the tremendous support that the rank-and-file teachers and certainly the union members gave. They were solid all the way, and that was a tremendous lift for us.
Safety for students and for teachers in the building was an important issue. CMEA officials recommended that their members not return to classes as long as the strike continued. They said that the law did not require that they be strike breakers. In fact, hundreds of CMEA members joined the MFT on the picket lines. Others formed truth squads, which went around to the community, explaining the issues and gathering support.
The CME had their first meeting on a Tuesday night of that week, at which time they took several votes. The first vote was to support the strike and go out at the payments. They turned that down. I take that back. The first vote was on the truth squads. They wanted to play a middle-of-the-road game. They did not want to go on strike, yet they did not want to go into buildings. So they decided they would do what they call truth squatting, going out and visiting business leaders in the community, going on streets, passing literature. Well, that vote was voted down. They did not accept that. The second vote that came before the House was to vote to support the strike fully and walk the picket lines. I was in line to speak for that motion. I was going to support that. Even though I did not support the strike, I didn't think the action was called for. I think the strike was strictly for organizational reasons, but on the other hand, I did not see it very attractive for us to go back into buildings counter to the strike. Before I had a chance to speak on the issue pro-strike, somebody called the previous question. They did, and that motion was defeated also. Somebody then asked to move to reconsider the first question on the truth squatting, and that motion then did subsequently pass. So on the next 2 days, what the CME, so on the first day, the CME members were advised by our attorneys to ask for a day of personal leave. And later we did get personal leave for 1 day. On the second day, we were told we should go back into the buildings and check on the teaching conditions in the building, report back, and then we would request to John B. Davis, superintendent, that the schools be closed starting Monday because of unsafe conditions, if that's what we found. And indeed, we did find that in many buildings, it was not a good educational environment and that schools should be closed down. Prior to making a request, John B. Davis had already decided to close schools down starting on Monday.
The phone chain stayed in operation every night, even if the message was just that they're still meeting and they're still negotiating and no progress has really been made. We felt it important that every single member be contacted every day, that the idea of solidarity in actual union, that you're in this, we're with you.
On Monday, the schools were declared officially closed. After 4 days, hopes rose when the superintendent agreed, for the first time, to negotiate policy items such as class size and student discipline. But soon afterwards, the MFT broke off negotiations when no progress was being made. Disagreement also arose over who would be included in the negotiations. The CMEA maintained that since both groups were on the Teachers' Council, they should be included in the negotiation meetings, while the Federation maintained that since it was the Federation that was on strike, it was with the Federation that the settlement would have to be made. What support did the striking teachers receive from other unions?
The president and our strike planners were very concerned that the rest of the labor movement would come in and support the strike. They did not really give us overall much support in terms of picketing or that sort of thing, but they did give us lots of help in organizing and supporting the strike in general.
As the strike continued and the public became more aware of the issues, a survey taken by the Minneapolis Star showed that public support for the teachers had increased. Students staged a honk-in at 8:07 when they displayed large signs encouraging motorists to honk horns for the teachers. There were numerous reports of coffee and rolls being delivered to teachers on the picket lines.
I remember having to come to 8:07 every day and wondering what it would be like to cross the picket line. There were days when I tried not to embarrass the pickets by coming in a school bus, and sometimes they wouldn't even see me. And I'd go in the back door and up through the shop section. There were other times when, for one reason or other, I'd be out during the course of the day, I'd come by in the car, and somehow the picket line would sort of meld away and there'd be a passageway for me to get through without yelling or hollering or anything. They just sort of turned away. Well, there goes that's a very poignant memory of mine.
In St. Paul, Federation teachers picketed their school board's meeting in protest of their own stalled negotiations and in support of the Minneapolis strikers. At the end of the first week of the strike, strikers marched on the state capitol in an attempt to bring public and legislative attention to their plight.
You might say that after a week or a week and a half of a strike, interest would wane and people would start to worry. Now, I'm out of a paycheck for a couple of weeks, and what happens about my pension and all that kind of thing. We had nightly rallies where the people would come in and we'd have a Dixieland band and I mean the spirit, if your spirits were down before you got there, they rose immediately because of the way Bob Rose, as I guess he was a pep leader, handled those rallies. It was just magnificent. And he would give the lesson plan for the next day, lesson plan for tomorrow, and he'd run through this, and people would listen, and they'd cheer. And then part of the program on those rallies would be Robbinsdale would come in and give us an $8,000 check. Then the next day, Columbia Heights would come in and give us money, and cheers would go up. And see, all the teachers out in these suburban areas were going through the same thing in negotiations as we were. Local 59 carried the ball on this. They all knew that. They all knew the risks we had taken. They all knew the risks that could happen if this thing was not successful. If we had failed, we were in deep trouble. So they were all in favor of it. And they came to our rallies and cheered, and there was a lot of togetherness and unionism in this whole thing.
Editorials in the Minneapolis Star and Tribune were, at best, waffling. While admitting that the law was unfair and punitive, the editorials did not support the teachers' defiance of the law as an act to bring about that change. Instead, they moralized on the teachers' poor examples to their students. To others who raised this objection, Norm Moen often cited the example of Thoreau in saying, "We are taking a courageous action against an oppressive and repressive law." Negotiations resumed, broke off, and then resumed again, and by Tuesday, April 21st, policy and salary items had been agreed upon, but the issue of amnesty for striking teachers remained. The board declared it was going to open the schools whether the strike was settled or not. They asked teachers to send letters of intent stating whether they intended to return or not. Striking teachers considered this an ultimatum and collected the board letters in containers marked junk mail and returned them to the board.
The vast majority of our faculty and staff were well regarded by the board, and to think of firing them was just... But on the other hand, there were those in community who said they should be fired because they'd violated the law. And
if you do this, if you try to break this strike, you're going to get all organized labor to go out there and sympathize with the teachers, and you're going to have riots and all kinds of problems in the city of Minneapolis if you do that.
Well, as I said, the law provided that the teachers automatically gave up their jobs upon going on strike. it did provide that the board could rehire them. And my distinct recollection is that the school board and administration really had no serious thought of not rehiring our teachers. We valued them as teachers, their ability and their loyalty to the school district, and just because they were dissatisfied with some of the conditions of their employment, we did not really have in mind putting them all out of work and finding other. Frankly, I don't know whether we could have found that number, and of course, certainly not as well qualified.
There were, as I recall, many citizen groups that were very angry with the teachers and advised the Board of Education what to do in terms of penalizing the teachers. The power of the Board of Education was reflected, I think, in the fact that we joined with the teachers in several of the court cases. There were 2 or 3 court cases of one kind or another. And certainly, and we lost all of them in the courts. We lost at the local level, we lost at the Supreme Court level, when we argued that teachers, that the Chapter 633 was unfair and denied no way of getting out of dilemma. But
the school board and the administration, as time went on, heard from a lot of different sources. I think number one, mothers who were maybe climbing the walls, wanting their children back in school. But it was interesting that I remember one morning I was called to a meeting. It turned out with David Rowe, then head of the state, I think it's AFL-CIO, and myself, just the 2 of us with the president of the Chamber of Commerce, pointing out to us in very strong terms what this strike was doing to the reputation of the city and a place for people to come and establish businesses and work, and in effect urging us very strongly to stop stalling and get the matter settled. And another time, we were called before the governor's in the governor's office, and there were representatives of, I'm not sure if they were representatives of the teachers or it was just the school board and administration, but Governor Levander actually said, I want you to open schools and we'll call out the National Guard if you need them to keep peace. We frankly didn't take kindly to his suggestion, but it was very powerfully stated, and there's no question we felt the impetus of that.
The strike kept going on and on because we didn't know how to solve it. I happened to run into a fellow from the National Labor Relations Board who gave me the idea. And this man, because this was a city problem, he didn't even want to be seen with me in discussing this thing, and I wanted to take him out to lunch. I said, look, give me some ideas, give me some ideas. But I think my wife had a hand in this. She made sure that the orange juice had some liquid refreshments in it, a little stronger than liquid refreshments. And I think that helped to kind of resolve and get everybody kind of relaxed in a compromising mood so that they could at least talk to each other without snarling at each other.
The board eventually agreed to amnesty for the striking teachers. That is, all striking teachers would be rehired. They would receive no pay increases for 1 year, but would receive a lump sum settlement at the end of the year, unless it would be ruled illegal. Teachers would be allowed to make up most of the lost time on Saturdays. Striking teachers would be on probation for 2 years, but the board guaranteed that they would not be fired except for good cause. The MFT membership voted on Tuesday, April 28th, to accept the settlement, and classes resumed on Wednesday, April 29th. Striking teachers had been out for nearly 3 weeks.
Fall, Governor Anderson, Wendell Anderson, was elected governor of the state in the election. And in the ensuing legislative session in '71, and then thereafter, that was a session, of course, that passed the Minnesota Miracle, which brought great dramatically increase state funding to the schools in the state of Minnesota. And that all occurred, of course, finally in a special session that the governor called. And during that special session in September of '71, PELRA was passed, the Public Employment Labor Relations Act, which of course then repealed the old no-strike law and the meet and confer laws. And it established the rights to have a collective bargaining election, the right of teachers to select, and all public employees, as far as that goes, to select an exclusive representative. And
Wendell Anderson was elected governor. He then said he would sign a bill that would authorize public employees the privilege or to go on strike to get to resolve the problems of negotiations. Now, he not only did that, but he set up machinery to resolve these problems.
The other agreement I now recall that was made was that the school board and I personally, as chairman, made a commitment in good faith to appear before the legislature in favor of changing that no-strike law, which applied only to teachers, as I recall, and not to other public employees. And we did that. When I appeared before the legislature, I remember that some, particularly of the country legislatures, who maybe were prouder than I think they should have been of this no-strike provision, were very critical of the Minneapolis board for appearing before them to urge an amendment.
The only answer and the only way to get out of the jackpot that you're in is to put the money in escrow and have the legislature repeal the no-strike law, and then have the legislature not only repeal the no-strike law, but give you the benefits that you were entitled to because of the strike. Now, the only ones that really benefited by this were those that didn't go on strike. They got the benefits immediately. And so the strikers who really got the benefits going were punished by it. So
the fact that we settled the strike and everybody went back to work under an agreement that was immediately challenged by a citizens group, taxpayer group, which postponed the financial settlement for teachers. And we talk about that now probably because that was definitely a part of it. At the time, it was agreed by the school district and board that the teachers that were on strike would get 1 year after the strike was settled and we went back to work, the negotiated increase in salary. Well, that was challenged, and the challenge was upheld. In fact, the courts concluded that under the wording of the law that the school district could not or should not pay teachers that had been on strike. So we had that then started a whole new issue within the union. And that consumed, I don't even remember the exact, 2 or 3 years to recall of negotiating time. We had a school district who had agreed to it, a school board who had voted and accepted the agreement, and to the credit of the district and the school board that was there, at least to our knowledge, they didn't do anything to impede our progress in ultimately getting it resolved, even though there might have been some of them who were opposed to it. The fact is, we were then left with probably the toughest challenge of trying to get permissive legislation passed by the Minnesota legislature which would permit the Minneapolis School District to, in fact, pay the teachers what they'd agreed to pay them for that.
Within a year, PELRA, the Public Employees Labor Relations Act, was passed, giving public employees the right to collective bargaining. It was not until 4 years later that the strike settlement bill was passed. Was the strike worth it?
When the strike was settled, we achieved minimum prep time, a half hour, 5 days a week, and that took a long time to increase. I don't remember even how many years it was until we got our full 50 minutes. And that led to the hiring of about 90 teachers for music, art, and gym. And I think that was a benefit not only to the teachers but to all the children in the city to have a music teacher and a gym teacher and an art teacher handling those subjects, because we certainly weren't trained to do it.
One positive effect of the strike was creating a stronger feeling of brotherhood and sisterhood amongst union members. Certainly there was a tightening up of the ranks, a feeling of unity and a feeling of strength and a feeling of success.
Another thing that was very important to us was the new discipline policy, which gave a lot more power to the teachers in the dealing with disruptive students, and also the student-teacher ratio, which helped a lot, 29 to 35 students, depending on whether you were in what kind of school you were in. And that helped to set a limit. It was still too many kids in a class, but at least it set a maximum. And
Strikes are indeed, in my judgment, the last resort. I'm still not convinced that the strike was necessary. I think that the deleterious effect of human relationships in some of our schools at a most critical time were pronounced. We were entering in the issue, and the school district in Minneapolis was the pioneer of leading the issues of integration, desegregation, integration, decentralization, special schools, parent choice. All of those were bursting out, and they were faculty initiated, so many of them. I was a superintendent, sure, but I captured the ideas of good faculty and staff, and then I would ride on the crest of their good intelligence. All of those were breaking forth, and yet the strike did represent a very divisive force within the community. I'm sure that that was resolved after the 4th or 5th year, but for a while the remnants of the hostilities that developed were evident in the schools.
When a strike occurs, then it has an effect on every contract thereafter. And that's hard to measure. The gains that were won, for instance, in the years that followed, because we demonstrated that we could do that, that we were very united in our goals.
We didn't achieve our maternity goal, maternity leave goal at the strike time, and it took us a while to get to that. At the next negotiating session, when we had collective bargaining, we brought it to the table again, and we were not able to work it out with the administration. We went to arbitration on it, and we did achieve maternity leave benefits for married women only. And it wasn't until the following year that the EEOC guidelines came out, and then the district was required to give those benefits to all women, regardless of their marital status. So,
and from now on, labor has, not only labor, but all the public employees have had their rights given to them because of the courage of the Minneapolis Teachers Federation. And
I guess the effect was that it certainly did organize teachers. Teachers rallied around the strike, and they felt good about it, that they could go out on an illegal strike and save their jobs. They felt good about it. First, it felt good about it. Down the years, many teachers have said to me, Don, that strike was a mistake. We should have never gone out. And one of the very negative effects that I've seen in many, many years after is that in every single negotiations, 2-year negotiation process, we've had trouble negotiating a good contract because the school board knows, the administration knew that the teachers would not go on strike. Teachers said, I will not go through that 70 strike again. It really tore the faculty apart. It cost us millions of dollars on all 3 sides, millions of dollars, and nobody wanted to go through that again. I think because of that strike, the teachers in Minneapolis have had to suffer low salary schedules for many, many years. I think it's just now, in the later 80s, that teachers are now thinking, maybe I'd be willing to strike again if I felt it was something we had to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think thereafter, though, after that strike, as Dave Rowe, the president of the state AFL-CIO, said many times in public, that was really the prime reason for getting the Public Employment Labor Relations Act passed the following year at a special session of the legislature in, I think, September 1971. So that our strike really opened the door to all public employees. And with the passage of PELRA, and then, of course, the important amendments in 1973 and in 79, which gave finally the right to strike in 73, if, for instance, if the school districts refused to negotiate, or if they rejected the award of an arbitrator, if there was an impasse and arbitration was requested, there was finally a right to strike that finally was made really unqualified in 1970.
Strike changed negotiations forever and ever in the state of Minnesota in terms of all public employees. The teachers' strike won the right to negotiate and bargain collectively for all public employees' unions, not just the teachers' union. So it was a significant milestone in Minnesota history of labor relations.
There's an awful feeling of pride. We organized it, the organization of the strike itself, and how the teachers conducted themselves, how they acted on the picket line. We'd actually give them instructions how you picket, what you do, the singing and everything. Made us look professional, that we knew how to run a strike, we did it correctly, and none of us had any real experience. And at the end of it, the gentleman from New York, and I cannot remember his name, said, it was the best organized strike I have ever seen. Your people were totally professional, you did it right. And I was a little part of that. Makes you feel good.